All right, you good?
I'm good to go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Echoes of War. This is a new title for what was previously the Pacific War podcast. Please do not run away. We're still going to be covering Pacific War issues in many episodes, but now we are geared towards military history throughout the ages. I am Pacific War Craig. I'm joined here by Gaurav. How are you?
Hey, Greg. Great to be on the Echoes of War, and also definitely looking forward to continue on the Pacific War podcast as well.
Absolutely. And finally, today we're going to come to the climax of kind of this mini series that sprang up when we wanted to talk about Hannibal. This is the third part in, we'll call it like the Second Punic War series. And well, a lot has happened. We last time we kind of went through Scipio Africanus and why he is, of course, the greatest Roman general. Just messing with you, Gaurav. And
Greatest Roman general of the time.
of the
We
time.
can get into a debate about this in the future.
Actually, yeah, that actually would make for that'd make for a good bonus episode, to be honest. But I guess, just to catch up, of course, we had covered in the first episode everything up to the Battle of Cannae. And then in the second episode, it was Scipio Africanus up until kind of a relatively about the same time period. But now I guess we're going back to the immediate aftermath of that cataclysm.
Yeah, and just for the audience's benefit, we are not covering every major
Of
theater
course.
of the Second Punic War. So the First Macedon War, the invasions of Sardinia, Sicily, there, or the early interventions in Hispania, where Scipio Africanus was not there. We're not covering this because our focus is on the two masterminds of generals on either side, Hannibal Barca and Publius Cornelius Scipio, who will soon be known as Scipio Africanus. And as you said, Craig, we are now coming to the climactic point where both of these generals fight the decisive battle at Zama. And this is going to be a fight where both are equals to each other, commanders of a veteran, well trained army. In the previous encounter, Scipio was just a very junior officer in the Roman field armies. So I think we should just briefly talk about what happened. So, as our previous episode, we talked about Scipio Africanus' journey till he takes over Sicily after his consulship, after destroying the Carthaginian presence in the Iberian Peninsula. Let's maybe go back in time to Hannibal now. So, we're going to focus a bit on Hannibal, where we look at the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Cannae. So, as the Romans fled back in terror to the city, Hannibal never really bothered marching on Rome. He knew he was too weak to take the city on its own with his current forces. Though his one of his key cavalry commanders, the Numidian Marble, said, "You are one moment. I really got this quote that I think we should really talk." He says, um, he, he says, "Assumedly, no man has been blessed with all God's gifts. You, Hannibal, know how to gain a victory. You do not know how to use it."
Pretty
Again, there's a big
prophetic.
what if scenario, very what if scenario of what would have happened if his army just appeared at the walls of Rome. We don't know, but ultimately, I think Hannibal was making the correct decision. He needed more reinforcements because the city of Rome was too big, even for his force, even in the state of panic. So he tried to take a port city in southern Italy, which now started to revolt against the Roman control. And one of the key outcomes from this is his brother Mago, who also was a senior cavalry commander, was able to board a ship and head back to Carthage. The intention was Hannibal and Mago are pleading with the Carthaginian Senate to send aid. And their rationale is quite similar to, I would say, how Franklin D. Roosevelt likened to sending material aid to Britain in World War II, with let them fight with if Britain fights in their backyard in Europe, America's backyard is safe. So we should deploy the materials there. So Hannibal has a similar kind of logic in the sense the war is right now being fought in Italy. Only Rome and its allies are suffering damage. So send us reinforcements. We just want men and supplies. Our homes are safe. Our farmlands, our workshops, our cities are completely safe. Let the fire and war be on the enemy's home turf. So Mago comes and he lays down all the great accomplishments from the crossing of the Alps to the multitude of victories Hannibal has had. And to add this huge flair, I will call it, for a very tense moment in the Senate when he's presenting his case, he drops baskets of gold rings into the Senate. And these are the rings taken from the patrician and equite classes, which were all taken from the various corpses. And mind you, this is Rome having already lost two consuls for sure in the battles with Hannibal, several other senators, tribunes, etc. Their senate is lost at least 40 to 50% of its members. And the equites and other patricians, they've also been decapitated. And now he is pleading, to gain more support. The unfortunate reality is the Carthaginian Senate is heavily split between two factions. You have Himilco, who's a member of Hannibal and his father's, the Barca party, who are very pro warlike and pro Hannibal. And then you also have an equally sizable, if not slightly larger, opposing faction led by Hanno the Great, who never really loved Hannibal and his family. He was a reason that his father just got disgusted with the Carthaginian politics and went off to Spain. And Hanno has always been the advocate for peace. He's trying to be that mercantile Carthaginian leader, not the military leader. Um, so according to the sources that we have, this is from Livy, I believe. The transitions, like when Hanno decides to speak after Mago has given his speech, he says, "Senators, I would have kept silent on the present occasion, for I did not wish on a day of universal rejoicing to say anything which might damp your happiness. But as a senator has asked me whether I still disapprove of the war we have commenced against Rome, silence on my part would show either insolence or cowardice. The one implies forgetfulness of the respect due to others, the other of one's own self respect. My reply is this: I have never ceased to disapprove of the war, nor shall I ever censure your invincible general until I see the war ended upon conditions that are tolerable. Nothing will banish my regret for the old peace that we have broken, except the establishment of a new one." This is his stance. And then he goes on to berate Mago. He says, "If you're doing so well, and so many people are coming from the Gauls, the southern Italians, why do you want us to send soldiers? You're getting your recruitment pool there. If you are, plundering enemy camps, you're destroying Roman armies, taking the baggage, destroying the estates of their nobles. Why do you still want wood and corn from us? You can get it over there." So he's kind of really just rubbing it in. And this is, to me, just his hatred for the Barca family rather than any political sense, regardless of his position. I think this is just a personal animosity. And so, and then he asks, if you say it, and this is because of one point Mago did make in his speech where he says, Italy's on the verge of revolt against Rome. He says, then have any of the Latin Confederacy tribes broken away from Rome and asked us for a peace or a truce? Has any one of them come over? And then when Mago and Himilco, an ally of the Barca family, both say no, he says, we still have a war going on. You have not won anything. And this is true. Central Italy throughout the war remained utterly loyal to Rome. And in our previous episode, we discussed what a predicament the Roman Republic was in the immediate aftermath of Cannae. So, however, the Barca family still had a decent um, presence in the Senate. So Hannibal did get some aid. It just was not enough. What was ultimately sent to Hannibal was 4,000 Numidian cavalry and infantry, 40 elephants, and 500 talents of silver. Unfortunately, the two reinforcing armies of sizable number, each at least 30,000 men, one would end up going to Iberia under Mago, as ordered by the Senate. As we discussed, Spain was the Carthaginian Senate's favorite theater, and another one would go to Sicily. Now, Hannibal just gets his reinforcements, and that's it. He is not getting anything beyond levies. And Rome has now fully adopted the Fabian strategy. They'll be fielding multiple armies against Hannibal. And no senator, I think, has ever more than 20,000 men in such armies right now, even the consuls. This is so that if they are defeated in battle, it's not a crippling loss like how it was at Cannae. And as we will see, I think, Greg, you have some things to add over here. Whenever Hannibal would fight them, he would still utterly annihilate the Roman armies. It is just that he has only one large army and Rome has multiple armies, and they are winning in other theaters right now.
Yeah, so prior to the Battle of Cannae, the Fabian strategy, which for the audience is just modern day attritional warfare, it wasn't picking up steam with a lot of the commanders and the populace. It was seen as, cowardly. And Fabius himself, he was seen as they nicknamed him the Delayer. After Cannae, it was such a terrific loss that basically most people got on board with the Fabian strategy. And as you have just mentioned, this encompassed a lot more than just kind of the scorched earth policy. It was the raising of multiple armies, trying to tell the commanders not to seek decisive battles. Those hothead commanders that did, yes, Hannibal went out and he decisively defeated them, spanked them really easily. But for the most part,
Uh,
yeah.
I think I would just add when the few battles that I would also highlight maybe a bit here. It's pretty much I think 90% of the Roman army gets killed in each of these encounters. So Hannibal's military prowess is still undiminished.
Yes, of course, because I mean, let's say the Romans had like the opposite idea. They started raising all these armies and they actually wanted to engage Hannibal. Hannibal would have done what was seen, in the French Indian Wars, for example, when when they were trying to conquer Canada. They would just have one large army taking down these other armies like dominoes, and it would have been easy. But the Roman policy certainly changed. Rome refused to negotiate under any circumstances. They really made a hard stance on that, and that has a lot to do with kind of the success in the strategy. The mobilizing of manpower was incredible. Uh, he conscripted a ton of people. Actually, for those who are fans of Dan Carlin would argue this is the downfall of the Republic because of how much, the average day Roman is now becoming incorporated to the military system and how they're changing everything from the old days. They're also, of course, yeah.
Just one point I wanted to add about their military manpower reserves.
Mhm.
I remember seeing this in some video, cannot remember where, or was it a text, but just around the year 200 BC, so just slightly after the Second Punic War,
Yeah.
the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Kingdom. One is one of the largest empires on the planet at this time, and the other is fabulously rich.
Mhm.
These are great ways to have a good amount of soldiers. Including reserves, they could probably, between the two of them, more have about a pool of around a quarter of a million men between the two.
Yeah.
Rome at the same time could look at a pool of almost 900,000.
Yeah. I don't know. Does that have a lot to do with concentration of populations? Because there's so many people had like migrated to the Italian peninsula and stuff because of the grace of
Uh,
Rome, you know.
I don't think so at this moment, given that the Romans did not really expand the legions to include the landless yet.
No, not
Can
yet.
after Canny, it was definitely an emergency where the landless and people who were ineligible otherwise were drafted up.
Yeah.
But at least for a few more decades, we would see that they still pretty much stuck to the system till the entire legion changed.
Yeah.
A discussion for another time.
Mm. But so if you want to encompass everything the Romans' policies is, so the Romans are using attritional warfare. They are refusing to negotiate, and they're exploiting Hannibal's isolation. So let's remember Hannibal himself with his army is basically stuck in central Italy, running around rampant, but he's cut off. He has no logistical supply line. His only hope was basically it's not going to come from sea because it would be attacked by the Romans, you know, any beachhead if they tried. It was basically Hispania, you know, sorry, anything coming over from Spain. And well, as we saw, you know, the previous episodes, the Romans decisively took that out and they made sure to. And they were very clever because they were basically trying to pit who were either neutral or allied to the Carthaginians against them. So the tribes in Spain, they won over a bunch of them, and that would ultimately lead to, you know, the downfall of Carthage in Spain. And well, we're going to be coming up to kind of what Scipio Africanus is going to initiate now with new invasions and well, kind of a new strategy as to how to deliver a death blow to Hannibal, because they certainly can't seem to do it within Italy, but they might venture outward out of it.
I'll just add a little bit to some of the battles, just maybe to show the
Mhm.
people, like let our audience know how successful Hannibal was still in the field, but the Roman strategy working. They would keep multiple armies, and as you said, any hot-headed commander, they would intercept his levies actually. So he was raising new troops from the newly conquered territories. And for example, there was this Battle of Beneventum where 18,000 new soldiers were raised for Hannibal's army. They were engaged by a Roman force of approximately the same size under Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. And of that levied army for Hannibal, all but 2,000 were killed. The Romans also lost around 2,000 men, but this is a big blow to Hannibal. And Hannibal would continue fighting. So there was this battle of the Silarus River. Out of the 16,000 Romans that engaged, 15,000 were killed. Hannibal having like moderate casualties. The Battle of Herdonia, again, 80,000 Romans, 16,000 killed. This man knows how to win battles. Though he starts taking losses after 209 BC. For example, at the Battle of Casnium, both had around 22,000 men. The Romans pretty much had a 100% casualty rate with around 6,000 wounded and the rest injured and fleeing. But they did inflict this time around 8,000 casualties on Hannibal's army. Mind you, this is 60% more casualties than what they inflicted at Cannae. They're improving even in Italy.
You'd have to
But
imagine
ultimate,
the morale of the Carthaginians, like the veterans, must have been really low by that point. Like they've been at war for a long time in a foreign land and they're basically trapped. They must know this.
yeah, I think the tipping point in the Italian campaign was definitely 211 BC. The city of Capua had immediately defected to Hannibal in 216 BC, and this is the second largest city in on the peninsula. And in 211 BC, Rome besieged it. Now, they are a good source of supplies and some amount of troops for Hannibal, so he had to relieve the siege. He tried to feign an attack on Rome, and he actually this time marched to within a day of the Eternal City. And to his surprise, the siege of Capua just continued. The besieging army did not even move. They just continued with their job. The garrison legions instead in the city marched out and around the city, just making a show of force. Say, hey, buddy, we see you over there. This was, in 5 years, the confidence level of Rome, even though they're still taking beatings in other theaters here and there, they are not panicking anymore.
But also, I mean,
It's
Hannibal would not have had the siege weaponry or capability to really besiege Rome. He couldn't even starve them out if he wanted to.
His army was too small. Rome was way too big. He
Yeah,
had a
yeah,
much larger army against Saguntum, and it still
hmm
took 8 months.
yeah.
And now he has a smaller army, and if he besieges Rome, well, there are quite a few Roman armies behind him now. It's actually like, and then this is where he just is like, as you said, his only hope is Spain sending reinforcements, and he withdraws into southern Italy. So speaking of that, I think let's talk a little bit about the decisive reinforcement defeat. In our previous episode, one of Scipio Africanus's victories was against Hasdrubal, one of Hannibal's brothers, who, before the crossing of the Alps, was left in charge of all Spanish operations. At the Battle of Baecula, around 20,000 of his 30,000 man army were killed or captured by Scipio Africanus's forces, but he did manage to escape with the remaining 10,000, and he also took a lot of the baggage train with him. So it wasn't a complete disaster, and Scipio Africanus was criticized heavily by the Roman Senate for this. In 207 BC, he makes it through the Alps, and he does not really suffer any casualties, unlike his brothers much. But that's because his brothers pretty much put the fear of God into
The
the Gallic
tribes, yeah.
tribes,
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
and many of them actually flogged to his banner. And his army does swell up to around 30 to 35,000 men
Which
when
you would
he.
expect because they would have been receiving so many news reports of what's happening in Italy. So they would have thought, yeah, this guy is about to win this war. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite crazy, and this is what the Romans feared the most as well. That if a strong army from Barca-controlled Spain lands up and it links up, then Hannibal with about 90,000 men, 100,000 men, that's a very terrifying prospect. And so, yeah, so Rome had two of its consuls, deployed to engage Hasdrubal. And unfortunately for them, unfortunately for Hannibal, his brother never really had any level of the military talent that his older brother had. Mago was a good commander, but Hasdrubal was, I think I'll just put it slightly better than some of our early Roman consuls, which really isn't setting a great standard. So at the Battle of, so so you had the two consuls, each are given, one is given 40,000 men to watch over Hannibal, and the other is given about 30,000 men to look over and try to engage with Hasdrubal, destroy his army. So we have this. He decides to take the approach on the towards the Balkan side. I think that's the Adriatic Sea, if I'm not mistaken. Whereas Hannibal had taken the western approach down Italy, he takes the eastern approach. So we have like you know Claudius Nero. He does have 40,000 men looking over Hannibal, and then he realizes that he can leave a part of his good chunk of his army, and Hannibal is not going to move. He then force marches with around 8,000 men to reinforce his fellow consul Marcus Livius Salinator, so that they can then engage Hasdrubal at this decisive battle. They know if they win this battle, Hannibal's pretty much finished. So, according to the sources, Hasdrubal had 48,000, but it's pretty much being discarded. They put his force not exceeding 30 to 35,000. So in this case, the Romans did have a slight numerical advantage. So when the battle started, they kind of lined up in the standard formations. I'm not really going to get into them. There was nothing new. You had the standard triplex axes, cavalry on the wings, Carthaginians mirroring it. So the battle starts off with the Roman left flank or cavalry charging the Carthaginian right. And then the center units also start to advance. And on this flank, the Carthaginian right is completely routed and they just break. Now, this time the war elephants, he did have about 10 elephants. They did some amount of damage to the Roman troops, but not enough to stop the momentum. But for now, the Carthaginian left wing cavalry and the Carthaginian infantry in the center are holding, even though the Romans are pressing. Now, the consul, Claudius Nero, who had the job to initially watch Hannibal and had come up with the small reinforcement group, he was commanding the right flank, and he was unable to attack the enemy because of some really poor terrain that was in front of him. And he just felt like it'll take him way too much time to just try to go through this terrain and bulldoze his way forward to Hasdrubal and his Gallic forces. He cunningly withdraws back and behind the enemy lines, behind his own lines, he moves around to reinforce the left. And this is when the Roman infantry also charge, and now it is where Hasdrubal starts to lose control of the battle. The elephants by now have started to panic, so the Carthaginians are suffering as much as the Romans. And as we'll see, panicked elephants are never really a good sign, mostly for the army that they were employed to. So we had the Gauls and the Carthaginian left. Now soon as the Carthaginian infantry started to rout, well, the Gallic infantry, I should call them, the Carthaginian left had 3 attacks, including a rear attack by Claudius Nero's cavalry. And this is where, and the Carthaginian cavalry has also fled the field. They're completely destroyed. And Hasdrubal now finally realizes that his time's up. He can't even escape like he did at the Battle of Baecula. He's completely surrounded, and he just charges into the Romans and with his remaining guards and was killed. Now, it's quite interesting. Polybius actually praises his conduct for this. And Polybius, as an ancient historian, has been quite unfriendly, to say the least, against the enemies of Rome. So this was, I guess, the best praise you could ever get. Now, some historians think he was quite foolish with the way he approached the entire campaign, which is probable. But ultimately, the Romans lost maybe around between 2,000 to 8,000 men. We don't really know the true estimates, but they can afford these losses. The Punic army under Hasdrubal, more than half of them are killed or captured, including their commander itself. I think the worst part of this was Claudius Nero's conduct. He just showed no respect. He had the body of Hasdrubal found and severed his head and then just threw it into Hannibal's camp in southern Italy.
Yeah.
It really would have unnerved Hannibal. No matter how strong of you are as a military man, this is something you just cannot do it. And I'm pretty sure it would have definitely demoralized, as you said, his army now, because now they know they are trapped for good.
Yeah, it's your family member's head, but it's also a message that there is no more hope of you receiving men or supplies. Like, you're done.
Yeah, that's it. Their supplies, everything are gone. By now they are getting bottled down into I'm not mistaken, Tarentum, as it was called back then, and they're pretty much limited to the boot of Italy now. So this was the big break that the Carthaginian and under Hannibal hoped for, and it was completely taken away. And at the same time, Mago, who was in Spain, gets his army destroyed at the Battle of Ilerda by Scipio. Sorry, Ilipa, my bad. And he plans to invade Italy again. But his force is not more than 15,000 men. So this time, when his army arrives a couple of years later into northern Italy, they capture what we know today as Genoa. The Romans are not even worried at all. And they march down, and they kind of end up having another Fabian strategy where some Roman forces kept him contained. And I think when they start getting reports that the Carthaginian Senate is going to pull them to defend the homeland, he does march down to reinforce with his brother. And finally, in a battle, he does force his way through a small Roman blocking force, but is severely wounded. And mostly it's said that he either dies in Hannibal's camp or dies on the voyage home when they are retreating to North Africa. Though there was one historian who said that, oh yeah, he never died there. He just lived on till the 190s BC. Though I don't think there's much claim to it. But yeah, now this is really a big second personal blow to Hannibal, where his another younger brother of his has been killed. And this one, I guess he had the misfortune of seeing him die in front of his eyes because the wounds he received from that Roman force were just too mortal. Now, this is where I think we should just stop a bit in Italy and move on to Sicily, where the other protagonist of our episode is based. So, after his victory and securing Hispania, Scipio comes back, takes the consulship. Now, he's advocating for an invasion of North Africa. He believes that if he threatens the Punic homeland, not only can he end the war, but he definitely sees that the Carthaginian Senate will panic and definitely call Hannibal's army back. Unfortunately, Scipio, despite as popular as he's become and the renown that he's won, he's made a few very big enemies, including Fabius Maximus. And Fabius Maximus publicly states that we should not go ahead. Now, it is said Fabius opposed this invasion, one, to just kind of check this young maverick general's popularity and ego. And the second is he was kind of reminded of the invasion of the Roman general consul Regulus in the First Punic War, which was a spectacular Roman defeat.
Yeah, definitely.
Unfortunately, the popularity of Scipio is too great that he is given permission by the Senate, where he's given the province of Sicily after his consulship, with the legal mandate that he was given proconsular imperium and can invade North Africa. The only caveat that they put, he can only take the legion stationed on Sicily and whatever volunteers he wants to raise. Now, these 12,000 men on Sicily, the two legions there, they were the exiles of Cannae who were banished for their failure. Even though they played a big role in helping various other consuls, such as the siege of Syracuse and the subjugation of Sicily,
Yeah.
they were never let back in. But now they get their chance, the real redemption chance.
Hmm.
And Scipio's quite popular that he had a call for volunteers, and 7,000 veteran soldiers immediately signed up.
That's pretty impressive. Oh, wow.
And yeah, then he launches his strike into North Africa. But I think now, as the Roman armies are coming in, maybe I think we should talk a little bit about the third kingdom involved, and that'll play a big role in this, Numidia. the politics involved is quite interesting if you ask me.
At this point, did you want me to go over kind of like a history, maybe just a little like reminder to everyone of the
Yeah, I think we
politics
should.
involved in this war? Because it is
Uh,
vastly more complex
it
than we're
is,
leading on.
it is, but I believe Numidia should have a. I think we can spend a few minutes here,
Yeah, of
definitely.
course. So just, catch people up because if you even go back even before this war even started, politically, the Carthaginians, they had recently come into taking control of most of Spain. And this was huge because Spain had a large amount of silver and other resources that they knew could help them fund something like a war. They had formed, the Treaty of Ebro, where they had kind of cut this little dividing border between them and Rome. And then Hannibal went and he caused a war, and that's all said and done. But there were initially on the political front, Hannibal's efforts were to break the Roman alliances, and he had some successes. Definitely, he had managed to break apart a few of the peoples that didn't like Rome as much, but he never really managed to get the closest allies of Rome to like back off. And Rome's policy of not negotiating certainly did a lot for them. But someone we haven't even talked about at all, is well in this episode at least, is the Macedonians. So Hannibal, he made like some diplomatic movements over to try and get Philip V to do something.
It's
And yeah,
no, it's I think quite amusing that Philip, because Philip the Fifth comes opportunistically
of course. Yeah,
into the war. He really doesn't care too much about Rome, but he's like, yeah, they are faltering. Let me make an alliance. I'm going to profit the best because
yeah, it
if
needed its
if you're gonna
classic.
take, yeah, and the way that the Romans learn about this is just a bit of a comical way. In the sense, the envoy that Philip sends to negotiate a treaty with Hannibal twice gets captured by a Roman praetor and his forces. The first time he manages to talk his way out, say, "Oh yeah, I'm here to just make a peace with Rome. We're cool guys. Nothing bad from us." Second time he's captured, tries the same thing, but well, this time he has a formal treaty with Hannibal in his possession.
Yeah, that's gonna it's
And
gonna bite them in the ass later.
it is. And I really wish we should definitely one day talk about that war just because of the politics involved. But yeah, please
But,
continue.
but more or less, this is another entire theater of the war. The Macedonians don't really provide, they don't really create a real other front. And, it's a little distraction, but not enough. Hannibal would have actually wanted a real front opened, and a bigger threat upon Rome so they could split them up. Doesn't really work out. Now, as you've
Especially
alluded,
since Rome also did not actually contribute too many men there. Also,
yeah.
they just had maybe a legion at the most, and they just got the locals to fight each other and Philip. Quite smart.
Now,
Diplomacy can work.
Now, as you've already alluded to, kind of the most crucial thing in the political front is, of course, Numidia. So Carthage, initially they had strong ties to Numidia, the Berber kingdom in North Africa. Numidian cavalry was kind of renowned. Definitely played a critical role in Hannibal's army, but he would be unable to maintain their loyalty, and this is because of the Romans. The Romans are going to be playing their own political games. So, as I had mentioned, the Romans, they were going to preserve their Italian loyalty, and this was just by refusing to negotiate with Hannibal. And they sent very strong messages to their allies as to what they could expect if they tried to. These are people like the Latins, Etruscans, and all the other Italian city states and such. They, for the most part, in central Italy at least, they remain loyal. A lot of them out of fear, I think. And there's definitely punishing. There was a big punishments for any defectors. Rome harshly punished anyone who went over to Hannibal's side. For example, after retaking Capua in 211 BC, the Romans executed the leaders and enslaved its population, sending a very strong message to the rest. Very Roman-like,
Yep.
typical Roman stuff there. Um,
I guess in a way also almost Mongols' practical brutality.
yeah. So now I'm coming up to this part. I don't know if you wanted to talk about this yourself, but the winning over of Numidia, because it's key
I
to
think
this story.
I'll just state let me just give a little bit of background of the
Sure.
kingdoms of Numidia. There are two kingdoms actually,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
or what we would know as Numidia. So you have Numidia is to the west of the Carthaginian domain. So you have the kingdom of Gala, which we can just call as the Eastern Numidian kingdom.
Hmm.
This is where the forces most loyal to Carthage generally come from. And one of the people we mentioned in the previous episode, the Massinissa, is the son of the king of this land. On the other hand, the larger territory is, Western Numidia, or you could call it, you know, the Masaili tribe, and they were under the king Sypax, and they were larger of the two kingdoms. Now, both also vied each other's territory. I mean, that's what any king wants. And for the most part of the war, the Numidians we would see fighting with Hannibal are from the eastern tribe, the enemies of King Sypax. And for most of the war, he is actually just a Roman friend, not really an ally, friend, but he's not helping the Carthaginians, which in its own way it's good enough. However, he is annexing the kingdom of Gala's territory because there was a civil war between Massinissa and his brother after their father's death. And Massinissa, that's why, was fighting with Hannibal because he felt if Carthage wins, they are going to now, and I serve them well, they will help me, take my throne and get me more. And considering the damage he'd been doing to Scipio's father before Scipio Africanus himself came, that's definitely going to happen. However, he starts seeing that now the war has decisively swung in Rome's favor. And Scipio has won a lot of goodwill with him because he rescued one of the nephews of Masinissa, like not rescued, but he treated him kindly, one of the nephews of Massinissa who was captured in one of the battles, and had him escorted under protection and returned to Massinissa. This would end up being the masterstroke move by Scipio in the long run, as we'll discuss.
Hmm.
So now both sides are trying to get the Numidian kingdoms to, uh, join them. So initially, Scipio sends Gaius Laelius. He's one of Scipio's main subordinates, along with his brother. Like these two are like just below Scipio in the ranking of the army, and both are learning from Scipio as well. I might add, to ratify the treaty with Rome. And Sypax now starts to play the political game. He says, "Oh, I'm not going to ratify any treaty until Scipio himself comes." And Scipio does. And well, at the same time, Hasdrubal Gisco, one of the other key commanders from Hispania, he's also returned, and he tries to intercept Scipio before the man could land, but Scipio's two ships managed to get into the harbor before intercepted, so he chooses not to violate the neutrality in a neutral town. But ultimately, with Massinissa switching to the Romans, Carthage now wanted Sypax. This is the key. And Hasdrubal Gisco just had the perfect gift for him, apparently. His daughter. And so he offered an alliance by allowing Sypax to marry his daughter, Sophonisba. And it is said she was a woman of immense beauty. And what was hidden underneath was a steadfast dedication and loyalty to her city, that is Carthage. And she was very politically shrewd. And she pretty much got Sypax under her spell. Oh, I guess when you have a beautiful woman as your wife, I guess that's
This
what happened with Mark Antony, right?
this is the ancient political warfare at its best.
Indeed. And so she is the key reason Sypax breaks off his alliance with Rome and sides with Carthage. But okay, Scipio, it's not a total loss. He does get Massinissa. So now we have the Numidian kingdoms we know their factions. So this is quite a bit of interesting political maneuvering between the two sides. And so Scipio does launch his invasion. So he first needs to create a base. So you have what is first called the Battle of the Great Plains. And this was a battle where Scipio landed, and Hasdrubal and Syphax mustered a larger army. Like I think they outnumber him by 50%. And Scipio this time kind of does a bit of a sorry, I think one moment. Oh, sorry, this is the Battle of Utica. The Great Plains was the battle after that. So he needs a base of operation. Utica is the second biggest city in the region behind Carthage, kind of like, Italy's Capua. So he's besieging Utica. The Carthaginians are sending an army under Gisco and Syphax. And now this is while his army is besieging. This is when actually Scipio tried to go to Syphax to ratify the treaty, which ultimately it did not move. But it seems Scipio never had any intention of honoring any treaty or making an alliance. He had Massinissa. He just went for actually an intelligence gathering mission, it seems. And yes, as they try to attack, they stormed the Carthaginian camp in with a spell of bad weather and pretty much just set fire to the camp, burning the hell out of the Carthaginian force and Numidian forces. Scipio had been outnumbered, and when the Carthaginians see the camp under fire, literally under fire, on fire, they rush in. They kind of drop their battle gear and everything, to put the cars out. And it is at that moment Scipio launches an attack with his forces who have already been prepared. It's kind of similar at Baecula in the sense he had already prepared his heavy infantry on the wings and just used this one part of the force to cause a distraction. And this was major defeat for the Carthaginians. It was said of their some sources claim that between 30 to 40,000 Carthaginians and Numidians were killed, around 5,000 captured. Gisco and Syphax do escape, but they just have a token force. And this is an important victory for Scipio because now he's able to secure Utica in the siege. And the Carthaginians are now gathering a new army, but they're now completely terrified. And this is when they start sending messages to Hannibal to get their best general back into town. And we then have in the latter half of the year, in 203 BC, near the Bagdadas River, which was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a site where Hannibal's father won a big victory over the rebels in the civil war that Carthage faced after the First Punic War. And at the Battle of the Great Plains, Scipio, Massinissa, and Laelius have around 20,000 men against 30,000 Carthaginians. And as you might expect, this is going to be a one-sided battle because, well, there wouldn't be a Battle of Zama if it did not go that way.
I mean, with the numbers
Eh,
and you're facing them on their home terrain, it would be surprising if you could pull a victory,
True. And this is where he's still besieging Utica. He secured the countryside, but the citadel itself is still needing to be subdued. And he actually is not even taking his full force. So Scipio doesn't have a large army to begin with. It's larger than the army of Regulus during the First Punic War, but his total strength never exceeds 30,000. So that's why he's only taken 20,000. And this is where the Romans just deploy. And again, this is where battlefield experience matters so much. A lot of the Carthaginian and Numidian forces are raw men. They're green. Where Scipio, he now has battle-hardened legionaries forming the core of his army, and Massinissa's cavalry who've also been fighting. And so the Romans advanced, and they opened, and the cavalry charged. And as usual, the Carthaginian cavalry flee on first contact from the Roman and their allied Numidian cavalry. And then the two legions and the Latin allies charged the enemies, and it's just a rout. The Carthaginian and Numidian infantry are not even putting up a fight. And especially when you see your cavalry just fleeing from the battle, not even off for like retreating a bit to form up for a countercharge. They just break and flee. Your own morale is low. And since quite a few of the units were involved in the previous battle, they kind of have a very low opinion of their chances, and they decide that discretion is a better part of valor. Though the Iberian infantry that were remaining did put up a valiant fight, it was pretty much a massive defeat for the the Punic forces, I'll call it. Now, I'm just gonna get back to Numidia because there's one aftermath that does happen. Massinis Sypax does flee and is then engaged by the forces of Gaius Laelius and Massinissa and near Citra. And even though Sypax has a larger army, and both Numidian cavalrymen are just charging and countercharging, throwing javelins, Laelius, to buy time for the heavy infantry to form up and deploy, starts using the Roman velites within his allied Numidian streets. This really destroys the momentum of Sypax. And once the heavy infantry comes, it is a massacre, and Sypax gets captured. And then the city is captured by the Allied forces. And then Sypax was delivered to Scipio, and he would be shipped over to Rome as a prisoner. But now Numidia has a new king, both kingdoms, Massinissa. But the former wife of Sypax does play a bit of a role here. So Sophonisba, she has infatuated Massinissa, it seems. The guy's in absolute uh, love with her. And unfortunately for Massinissa, Scipio already has seen what she's done and knows she's a threat. She swayed one king in Numidia, she definitely can do it again. He demands that she is to be handed over so that she can be a prisoner. And no doubt, ornament in his eventual triumph. And now Massinissa is put into a choice: keep my beautiful wife or keep my kingdom. Ultimately, he does end up siding with Scipio, but this Sophonisba, in the end, she decides to poison herself rather than, uh, you know, be a prisoner. And and she does this after Massinissa tells her that I can't do anything. Sorry, I think he valued the kingdom more. And she drinks a cup of poison, and then while she dies, she apparently curses Massinissa for just being a useless guy and everything. Making the marriage really bittersweet and everything.
Wow.
And Massinissa does give her he sends the corpse over to Scipio, so he knows this threat is gone, and his boy is now going to fully back him. But yeah, so this is like where we see some politicking. And now The Carthaginian Senate, while they've called for Hannibal, they start to play for time. They have Scipio and Rome, like, but Scipio, they drop a treaty, which the rough draft is ratified by the Roman Senate. But the moment Hannibal and his armies, whatever's left of his army, I should say, lands in North Africa, he is put in charge of the force of almost 50,000 soldiers with 80 war elephants, and the Carthaginians break off negotiations. We now have the climactic Battle of Zama. And as I said earlier in the episode, Scipio and Hannibal will now face each other, not for the first time, but for the first time as equals, commanders of veteran soldiers and armies. There's two interesting events that do happen before the battle. It seems a couple of spies were sent by Hannibal to try to assess what is the strength of Scipio's men,
A very famous
and
story. Yeah.
they get captured. And as the Numidian cavalry and the Massinissa have not arrived, when the spies are brought before Scipio, he doesn't execute them or do anything. In fact, I think it's that like he gives the equivalent of a personal tour of the entire Roman camp. So they just see the Roman and Italian infantry and the Roman cavalry. And they're going to report this to Hannibal, which he doesn't really fall for it because he knows the Numidians are on their way. But I guess the treatment really did surprise him because it definitely would be something what Hannibal might have done in that situation, trying to play the opposing general's minds or such. He tried to understand his enemy. And it's I think I really like that story. And the second is the meeting between Hannibal and Scipio before Zama. This was, if I'm not mistaken, just the day before the battle, where they both try to see if they can actually put a proper compromise.
It's quite
So with
interesting that these two great generals, you don't often see two generals coming to a meeting before a battle like this. It's an interesting story to be sure.
Especially since it seems that their real intention was to actually hash out a real peace since they gained something. And actually from Flashpoint history, when he says Hannibal is curious because I think he's found a Roman commander that thinks very similar to him. He wants to see him because he can also understand himself as well. This is from, I'm pretty sure he would have heard of all of Scipio's accomplishments by now, how he would have won. And no doubt he would have realized that this is a guy that understands militaries. He knows to use combined warfare. He can adapt strategies. He knows to play the political game. This is not the typical Roman general that he's used to facing. Now, according to Polybius, they come to a point between their camps. There's just a few bodyguards. I think the only other instance I know in the past in the Roman Republic of a Roman and enemy general meeting, I think that was Caesar with the king Ariovistus during the Gallic Wars. So after saluting each other, Hannibal does speak. He says he wished that the Romans had never coveted any possession outside Italy, nor the Carthaginians outside Libya, for these were both noble empires and were, so to speak, marked out by nature. But since our rival claims to Sicily first made us enemies, and those for Iberia, and since finally unwarned by the lessons of misfortune, we have gone so far that one nation has endangered the very soil of its native land, and the other is now actually doing so. All that there remains for us to do to try our best to depreciate the wrath of the gods and put an end, as far as us in lies, to these feelings of hostility. I personally am ready to do this because I have learned by actual experience that fortune is the most fickle thing in the world, and it inclines with decisive favor now to one side and now to the other side on the slightest pretext. treating mankind like young children. But I am anxious about you. But it is about you that I am anxious, Scipio, for you are still a young man, and everything has succeeded to your wishes both in Iberia and Libya, and you have as yet never experienced the ebb tide of fortune. I fear, therefore, that my words, true as they are, will not influence you. But do look at the facts in the light of one story and not that connected with the former generation but our own. Look at me. I am Hannibal, who, after the Battle of Cannae, became the master of nearly all Italy. I'm presently advancing to Rome itself and pitching my camp within 40 states of it, deliberated as to what I should do with you and your country. But now I'm in Libya debating with you, a Roman, as to the bare existence of myself and my countrymen. That's quite a statement, but in a way, it's also marked respect in a way. And I do have to add, if when we go through Scipio's the rest of his life, the ebbs and fickles of fortune really play its hands. After Hannibal gave his speech to Scipio, Scipio said to have replied that neither in the Sicilian nor Iberian war were the Romans the aggressors, but notoriously the Carthaginians, which no one knew better than Hannibal himself. That the gods themselves had confirmed this by giving the victory, not to those who struck the first and unprovoked blow, but to those who only acted in self defense. That he was as ready as anyone to keep before his eyes the uncertainty of fortune, and tried his best to confine his efforts within the range of human infirmary. But you had yourself quitted Italy before the Romans crossed to Libya with the offer of these terms in your hands. I do not think that you would have been disappointed in your expectation. But now that your departure from Italy has been involuntary, and we have crossed into Libya and conquered the country, it is clearly that matters stand on a very different footing. But above all, consider the point which affairs have reached now. Your countrymen have been beaten, and at their earnest prayer, we arranged a written treaty in which, besides the offer made by you, it is provided that the Carthaginians should restore prisoners without ransom, should surrender all their decked vessels, pay 5,000 talents, and give hostages for their performance of such of these articles. These are the terms which I and they mutually agreed upon. We both dispatched envoys to our senates and people, we consenting to grant these terms, and Carthage just begging to have them granted. The Roman Senate agreed. The people ratified the treaty. But though they have got what they asked, the Carthaginians annulled the compact by an act of perfidy towards us. What course is left me but to put yourself in my place and to say, without the severest clause of the treaty, are we to do this, say you, not in order by reaping the reward of treachery that may learn in the future the outrage of the benefactors, but in order that by getting what they ask for, they may be grateful to us. So, as you can see, this is a situation where Scipio is saying that, hey, we did not start the war. All we did was react, and that's why we won because gods are favoring us. And it is true that the treaty that was initially signed and ratified, at least by the Romans, was just employed by the Carthaginians to buy time for Hannibal to come and get ready for battle. So, yeah, we now have the climactic Battle of Zama, which takes place on the fields. And now we need to see what are the forces that are going to be arrayed against each other. Hannibal has 4,000 cavalry, 80 war elephants, and between 36 to 46,000 infantry of varying qualities and nationalities. Scipio, on the other hand, has about 4,000 Numidian, 2,000 Roman and Italian cavalry, so giving him the cavalry advantage, and 24,000 infantry, which includes a few thousand Libyan and Numidian infantry as well. So this is quite an interesting given that he is going to be outnumbered. So Hannibal has not had time since his arrival into Africa. to really integrate his forces into a common structure. So when he deploys his army, he just kind of keeps them completely separate of each other so that it's just going to be easy for command and control as well. So the first line was the survivors, sorry, the first line was made up of veterans of Mago's army that came to reinforce him, plus I think some of the Gallic survivors, and Iberian soldiers and Linguarians were also there. These are the first line. It is said to be between 12 to 15,000 men. The elephants were in front of them, and the Balearic skirmishers as well. Then you also, and the other skirmishing troops also did include some Moorish archers and javelin men. And the elephants were spaced about 30 meters apart. And it said that the light infantry were ahead of the elephant screen, since the intention was to use the elephants as the first battering ram per se and let them charge into the Roman lines. The second lines was made up of not only the Carthaginian citizen armies, the citizen conscripts that they would have called up when Scipio landed, and other African nation soldiers that are still loyal to Carthage. These were his second line, and they amounted to a similar size of around 12,000. Now, around 200 meters behind the second line is Hannibal's third line. These are the veterans that have accompanied him since Hispania. They fought with some of them have been fighting with his father. And some people have described this as the most wanted, most experienced and ferocious battle line in the world at that time. And you can't disagree with that. They are the victors of Cannae. They are the men who survived the Alps. They are men who won battle after battle, inflicting horrendous losses on their enemy. But this is his key reserve. And he does have his cavalry on both flanks. And the Numidians were placed on his left flank, so opposite the Roman right. And the Punic cavalry would have been placed on the right flank. It might have been a kind of lopsided in terms of disposition towards Numidians. But we can't know, but he's anyways outnumbered on the cavalry, so it's not going to be a massive advantage. Scipio, on the other hand, is kind of just deployed in the standard formation, where the Velites screening the Roman legions, the main infantry in the three lines of Hastati, which are the lightest of the heavy infantry, I should call it. Then the Principes, and then the Triarii with the cavalry. So Massinissa's 4,000 cavalry were on the right of the Roman line, and Gaius Laelius had 1,500 Roman and Italian cavalries on the left, facing the much larger enemy cavalry force. There were about 600 cavalry left in reserve. It's not really known what role they took up. And the Numidian infantry that Massinissa did get were likely positioned with the cavalry forces, since they anyways know how to work with these units. So when the battle commenced, you first have the cavalry charges, and each force, of the cavalry on the flanks, they sent javelins at each other and withdrew. And these was like just skirmishes. And then as the cavalry are fighting, the elephants are ordered to charge. And I think the hope was like similar at the Battle of Metaurus, where they actually did do some damage to the Roman infantry. Scipio had the Velites and Hastati just kind of part ways, had special units to just, you know, bang their drums, blow the trumpets, and all the instruments, which pretty much just sent these beasts into a complete frenzy. And this is like stating that these elephants, since they were just startled by just loud noises, rather than just being stabbed by a multitude of pointed arrows, spears, javelins, would mean that these are really young elephants. They have not been trained that well yet. And they kind of crash into the Carthaginian line and they smash, unfortunately, into Carthage's Numidian cavalry, which is where their cavalry was against the outnumbered Roman and Italian cavalry. And in the meantime, Massinissa on his flank, he has an overwhelming advantage in numbers against the Punic cavalry. And soon, both cavalry contingents of the Carthaginians on the flanks are in full retreat, being driven off the field of battle. And the Romans are pursuing them. Meanwhile, you do have the infantry charge. So the first Carthaginian first line has taken up battering. So Scipio does advance with all of his army in the spacing that would have been standard. Hannibal has only ordered the first two lines to advance. The veteran line is still staying put. So the survivors of Mago's army and the Roman Hastati charge violently, and it's said to be quite a brutal hand-to-hand fighting. But ultimately, we see that the Romans start to gain the upper hand. One of the key reasons is every Roman soldier still is armed with a short sword and a heavy shield and some chest armor and helmet. Even the Hastati, who are the most least armored of all the Roman heavy infantry units, these guys can stand up. And the advantage of the short sword is in close quarters combat and large groups, it is more lethal. You don't need as much room for maneuver. And unfortunately, the Gallic units tend to have long swords and spears, which they require a larger area of maneuver, which is going to be denied to you when you are literally, shield bumping with your enemy. So even though the Hastati do take some losses, the Carthaginian front rank, and they completely shattered and broke. Now these mercenaries and all are fleeing, and the Punic second line does not let them pass, and quite a few of them get butchered by their own men, who then, with the survivors now having to reform with the second line. And they join on the flanks of the second line, so that it's a kind of a much longer second line that's going up against the Roman first line. And now the Hastati, who the Roman front rank of infantry, they've taken a beating, but they're not out of the woods yet, and they once again um, charge the enemy second line. And Polybius says that the men here fought on both sides, especially like the Carthaginian and African spearmen who made up this force. They fought fanatically and in an extraordinary manner. And the Hastati, who've now been engaged in combat for quite a while, are almost on the point of breaking. So Scipio now feeds in the principes, the second line. Now, these are, for the audience, these are way more heavily armored troops. You can think of them as a basis from which the image that we have of the Roman legionary was formed in terms of armament. So the principes were fought, like, even though they also had a struggle, they completely broke and destroyed the Carthaginian first and second lines, I shall call it, with the Hastati men who kind of like recovered a bit of stamina, pursuing them and killing many of them. And this was actually a good chance if Hannibal had let his third line continue to advance and stay 200 meters or so behind the other lines. Since he held them back, there was quite a bit of distance between his front two lines and where he's positioned. Otherwise, he could have actually launched a brilliant counterattack at this moment. The Roman line is disorganized since it's just got through the confusion of the fight. They would be easy pickings for this brutal set of warriors. And so now Scipio realizes he has to fight the third and most experienced and dangerous line of infantry in the world. So they sound but a credit to how we see the Romans starting to improve their discipline. Bugles were sounded ordering the Hastati to break off pursuit and reform the line. And they did. Considering this is not the professional Roman army yet, it's still technically a citizen army. It's quite an impressive feat. Now, with Hannibal's line now being augmented by the survivors of the first two lines, it extended way more than the standard Roman line. So this time Scipio finally goes all in for his battle. The Hastati form the core center of his new elongated line. They are flanked by the Principes, and on their extreme flanks are the Triarii. The Triarii are the most elite veteran soldiers of the Roman army. And interestingly, unlike the other two lines which are equipped with a sword, they are actually equipped with spears. But when the Romans tend to commit them to battle, it's either due to those guys are on the verge of mutiny because of not getting any combat action, or you know things are so bad that you need to fall back to the triarii. That was a very popular saying within the Roman times. So now both sides did take some time to rest and address the lines, and it is said that because of the casualties and everything, the lines are now comparably equal. So it would have been around 20,000 men. But that just means Scipio's first two lines have pretty much destroyed 60% of Carthage's infantry. Now, the one thing going for Scipio, this core of the legions, the Sicilian legions, they are not afraid. They are veterans themselves. They've also fought. They are not green troops. They know that they are up against the guys who beat their comrades at Cannae, and today this is the day they get their redemption and their vengeance. And so when they reorganize, they again charge into a huge melee. Like neither side is gaining an advantage. It's just a brawl at this point. And it's at that moment we have another candy take place, in the sense the Roman and Numidian cavalry, who have either been lured or just were in a bloodlust pursuing the enemy cavalry, turn about and hit Hannibal's third line from the rear. This is where the fighting was over. Resistance collapsed, and Hannibal was just one of the few men that escaped the battle. Despite the ferocity of the fighting, Scipio's casualties overall were pretty light. 1,500 dead, maybe. Then definitely you could put like 3 times more wounded.
It's pretty light, yeah.
However, Hannibal's army, if he it's you just have a few hundred men, including Hannibal, just getting away. That's it. Half of them, over 25,000, were killed, depending on whether we take the army size to be 40 or 50,000, and the rest were captured. Carthage was finally broken. So after the Battle of Zama, we see that the treaties are going to be signed now. And this is going to be where I think Carthage should have definitely not played for the time and then repudiated the treaty when Hannibal arrived, because the terms were harsh. So according to the treaty, uh, they were to pay about 10,000 talents of silver. So I think if I'm not mistaken, one Roman talent is about 30 kgs or 32 kgs. I know there was like some difference in measurements. So yeah, that's a lot of money that they have to pay. 10,000 talents. And it's to be paid over 20 years. Hostages were taken, and more importantly, any Roman prisoner of war across all theaters is to be released without ransom. And Carthage is no longer allowed to possess any war elephants, and its fleet is limited to 10 ships.
That is
I suppose
ridiculous. Yeah.
if it's ridiculous, you should, when Regulus in the First Punic War put a treaty, he just said Carthage can only have one ship. So I think this is an improvement. And now, more importantly, Massinissa was recognized as the ruler of all of Numidia, and Carthage is not allowed to make war on any one of Rome's friends. Sorry, it is prohibited from waging war outside of Africa and in Africa only with Rome's permission. It can't do anything else.
Yeah, so Rome gets to control its foreign policy. It's the number one crux of any treaty. That one is like a
Yeah,
no-go. Yeah.
they're now a friend of Rome.
Yeah, so protectorate.
Yeah. And interestingly, it was Hannibal who just convinced the Carthaginian Senate that we should just accept this treaty. We don't have a choice right now, which is kind of true. What will you face them off with? But this was just like the second of the third Punic War, so we know there's a third one. And
Yeah, but the Third
just
Punic War
briefly,
is it's not much of a
it's not
yeah.
as big.
Yeah.
So this brings us to the end of the Second Punic War. It was quite a long conflict, almost 16 years,
Yeah.
even though the first one was also a pretty gruesome slugging match as well, over 23 years. But at least in this one, there were way more decisive moments.
Yes.
There was strategy right from the start by both sides, regardless of the lunacy. It's like playing chess compared to the First Punic War from both.
Definitely.
And this and after this war, we would also see that Rome would probably is now established itself not only as a main power in the central and western Mediterranean, but probably the entire Mediterranean by now. It's why, as we will see, as Rome starts to get entangled into Greece, it is thanks to this that the various city-states call to Rome, right from the Bosphorus Straits,
Yeah.
to help protect them. That's the reputation Rome has now received. And on top of that, it's secured a good chunk of Iberia. It has Sicily under its control. It has some African territories. It has Sardinia. It has Corsica. Gaul, like southern Gaul, south of the Alps, has now been will be completely Romanized. This is the start of what we will call the Romans' expansion and their empire building activities. Scipio also would get his much deserved triumph. And this after this victory, he was given the name Africanus, which is how we know him today. And this is, I think, the zenith he reached. And keep in mind, he's reached heights no Roman has probably ever reached till date. And he's a man who's still in his 30s. He's not even at the legal age for a consulship. And he's now immensely wealthy. I think he puts about 60 tons of silver into the Roman treasury. This is a deposit. And he also gives each one of his soldiers a nice payday after the triumph. But yeah, both him and Hannibal will continue to have major political roles in their respective nations. And Scipio will still be an architect involved, at least from a political side, for Rome's expansion into the east. Hannibal, on the other hand, is focused on rebuilding his home nation. And I think this is where we should look at ending this mini series we've done on a certain section of the Second Punic War.
Yeah, it accidentally lent itself to trying to the highlights of the Second Punic War basically became this series. And I'm now just realizing, and for the audience's sake, they won't even notice this because I'll probably edit in like a little ad break, but my power went out right during the conversation between the two generals. So that was awkward, but the file was saved. I'm very surprised. That was thank God. I also realized at the very beginning I didn't even do a read for my YouTube membership or my Patreon, so I'll shamelessly do it here. Even though if you might actually be watching this on another YouTube channel called Echoes of War, at some point it'll be made, or you're listening to this on all the podcast platforms. But if you want to further support me, you can go over to my YouTube membership over at the Pacific War channel, or you can join the Patreon at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast. It's more than 26 episodes and ongoing at this point. A recent poll actually went up, and everybody voted for, surprisingly, my idea on who financed World War One. So it's an economic history episode. I'm actually very surprised people voted for this en masse, but it'll be that for this month. You also get early access to all the content I make, and you get voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. If you join either, it's the same price, same perks. The only advantage for the YouTube membership is there's a few more unlisted episodes I did a year or two ago that are kind of politically incorrect stuff. And yeah, they're a little grungy and comedic. You might like them, you might not, but they're bonuses. So I do recommend joining the YouTube membership if you wanted. But stating all of that, thank you, Gaurav. You took the lion's share of this miniseries, as this is kind of the, I'd say this is your shit more so than mine. I mean, I know, I remember I studied this in university, of course, and everything, but you certainly destroyed this. This was probably one of the most entertaining podcasts I've ever been part of, and I really loved it.
It's my pleasure, Craig. Thanks for having, like, putting up with me for this topic, and I hope you enjoyed, and the audience definitely enjoyed this.
I think they
So,
will.
guys, please, wherever you hear us, can give us feedback, give us a good rating. We'd really appreciate it.
Definitely, especially the majority when I look at my analytics, it's Spotify and Apple Podcasts. There's a lot of people who use Apple Podcasts. I don't use Apple products, so I wouldn't really know. But I know that both have a rating system, so if you can give us a good rating, it would really help out. And of course, if you want to, have some input, you can go over to my YouTube channel. I have a business email address. You can ask anything you want. There's actually been quite a few people who've come forward to ask for things. You can leave comments on any of my videos on YouTube, my shorts, on community posts and such. And oh, the number one place, of course, is to join my Discord. The link can be found on my YouTube channel, but if you look it up, it's the Pacific War Channel Discord. Over there, there's a group of like-minded people, and you can talk about anything you want. But stating all of that, this has been Echoes of War, over and out.